year, this semester really, the University of Houston MSA decided to follow a theme for all its programs. And that theme was the first half of the kalima, Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And here all our programs were designed around this theme, focusing on how to get closer to Allah, how to build our relationship with Him. And this event essentially is the conclusion of the first half of the semester, the Ashhadu an la ilaha illallah. And so without any further delay, I'd like to take over the brief overview of tonight's program. So first, Imam Khalid Latif will be speaking, and right after we'll have a 10 to 15 minute break for refreshments, and then Ustad Haroon Moghul, and then we'll have a combined question and answer session. So, and after that, entertainment session as well. So for those of you who do not know Imam Khalid Latif, this is his first time, I believe, in Houston. He's the Executive Director and Chaplain of the Islamic Center of NYU, and he was nominated by Mayor Bloomberg as a chaplain for the NYPD. So without any further delay, Imam Khalid Latif.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا مولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله. In the name of Allah, the Gracious, the Merciful, all praise is due to Allah, the Lord of the universe, the Master of the Day of Judgment. I bear witness and testimony to the oneness of Allah, to His magnificence, His omnipotence, His might, His glory, to His being the creator and sustainer of all things, the giver of life, the guider of hearts, the Master of the Day of Judgment. And I bear witness to the fact that Muhammad ibn Abdullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam is His servant and final messenger. May the peace and blessings of Allah be upon him and upon all those who choose to tread in his path until the last day. It is said that on one occasion, a man comes to the Prophet sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam wanting to embrace the deen of Islam. And after this man takes his shahada, he asks the beloved of Allah sallallahu ta'ala alayhi wa sallam to teach him something. So the Prophet ﷺ, he says to this man that when you hear somebody sneeze, say, Yarhamakullah, this is a right that they have over you. So this man, he has learned something from the Prophet ﷺ. His name is Muawiyah ibn Hikam, and so he is excited, he has learned, and when he has the opportunity to act upon it, he knows what to do. They now come together, the Prophet, this man, and some companions to pray the Asr prayer. And in the course of the Asr prayer, somebody sneezes. And this man, knowing that when someone sneezes what he's supposed to do, he says, Yarhamakullah. And the companions who are standing in prayer, they begin to stare at him. Feeling their glares upon him, he becomes somewhat discomforted. And so he speaks out again, why are you looking at me? And they try to signal him to be silent. That the tradition tells us that they begin to slap against their knees, their thighs. The man, he finally gets what they're saying. He becomes quiet, but he's somewhat upset. At the end of the prayer now, the Prophet ﷺ approaches him, and this man says that, by the one in whose hand my mother and father's lives lie in, that I swear by that thing that this man Muhammad is the best of teachers. He did not repudiate me, he did not revile me, he did not scold or condemn me, but he simply said to me that within the course of this prayer, we are reciting the words of Allah. And so it is not appropriate to intertwine them with any other words. And we want to be able to reflect and think about this narration in the course of the discussion that we're having tonight around this question of why me, Allah? Because that question gets posed to many of us a lot, directly and indirectly. And we don't want to think about it in terms of us dealing with tests, in terms of us dealing with trial and hardship and being patient. These are things that we hear a lot of the time. But we want to think about it from the perspective of when somebody comes and asks us this question, why, really what kind of response are we giving to them? The Prophet ﷺ, he was the best of teachers. He was a man who anybody could come and speak to about anything, and he was able to relay the deen to them in such a way that he knew their respective strengths, their respective weaknesses. He knew their story, their reality, their narrative, and he could convey it to them on an individualized level. A man comes to the Prophet ﷺ, Ya Rasulullah, can I kiss my wife while I'm fasting? And to him he says, yes. Another comes, Ya Rasulullah, can I kiss my wife while I'm fasting? And to him he says, no. The same exact question of a legalistic nature posed to the best of creation, and he gives different answers. Because the ones who are posing the questions are coming from different realities. So the way it applies in their life is not the same. One man is a little bit older, so the Prophet tells him that yes, you can, because there's not a worry that perhaps that kiss will lead to something else that will invalidate the fast. But to the other who's a little bit younger, you shouldn't, because potentially that kiss will lead to something else. It's not black and white. They're coming from different realities. We need to understand this, because when someone comes to us trying to deal with the reality that they face, when they get to a point where they're asking the question why, we give them the same regurgitated answers. Be patient, sister. Be patient, brother. This is a test from Allah Azza wa Jal. And the person is left still trying to understand why their reality is the way that it is. But they get no answer. And they are now even questioning their faith to a certain extent. It's wrong for me when I'm being tested to complain about it. It's wrong for me to ask the question why when I'm trying to understand why it is that I'm going through what I'm going through. We have to understand that within the Muslim community, like any other community, people go through some serious things. On a daily basis, on a regular basis, young men, young women, old men, old women come into our center at New York University sitting and trying to understand, why did I go through what I went through? Why did this happen to me? Why did this happen to my mother? Why did this happen to my father? Why did my father do this to me? Why, when I wanted to marry that person so badly, Allah did not answer my dua? Why, when I was younger and someone was entrusted to look after me, rather than respecting the authority that they had over me, they dared to put their hands on me in a way that no man should ever put his hands on a young girl? Why is it that my father puts his hands on my mother in ways that we don't see in our tradition? Why is it that these things are allowed to happen? We're going to tell those people this is a test from the divine. We're going to tell those people that Allah Azza wa Jal is testing you. Just be patient. It's something that we want to think about deeply. More often than not, when we are dealing with Islam, we deal with it in this way that it is a very utopian-esque set of ideals. A set of intangibles we don't understand. And Haroon said this once very profoundly in a khutbah he gave at the IC at NYU. Islam is about reality. It's about understanding the reality of a situation, understanding the reality of the people you're engaging, and letting them understand that despite what has happened to them, they can move forward. And as we get into it, I'll share with you some examples of things and truly try to reflect how would you answer those situations if you were put into them. But we want to backtrack and think about the importance of having an individual who knows how to connect to you in your life. Men and women came to the Prophet ﷺ speaking about pretty much anything, and they knew that he would be a resource for them. Ya Rasulullah, I committed zina. Ya Rasulullah, I kissed a girl I wasn't supposed to. Ya Rasulullah, I drank alcohol. The Prophet ﷺ listens to all of it. He listens to all of it. He is neither harsh nor judgmental. And after he listens to it, he synthesizes and makes critical sense of it and understands who it is that is speaking to him. He gives his advice. He gives his counsel in a way that he knows that person will listen and they will reach their potential best despite going through what they've gone through that is plaguing their inside. Will your teachers do that for you? Will the people you go to seek advice from do that for you? When you are somebody who's given the opportunity to give counsel and advice, to listen to what is plaguing a heart, are you that person who knows how to connect to someone? How will you answer the question if someone comes to you and says, why is Allah putting me through this? What will you say? Many people in our generation, they don't know how to make decisions. We see the world through this lens of absolutes. Everything is right and wrong gets equated to good and bad gets equated to what is halal and haram. It's not how it works. There's not a direct answer, an explicit answer in the Sharia about everything. The Sharia can give us guidelines on how we can get married, who we should get married to, but it won't tell us in specific, is this boy or girl someone that's good for me? When you go and you seek to get advice and counsel from someone on most issues, they're going to give you advice and counsel based off of their subjective experience. This is what I've gone through, this is what you must do. This is what I've seen, so this is what you should do. Where in the hadith does the Prophet ﷺ say to somebody who comes when they're being plagued by reality that this is what I went through growing up, you got to do the same thing? This man's life was not an easy life. 23 years he kept going and going and going without stopping. But in his childhood, his father passes away before he is in the world. He loses his mother, he loses his grandfather. This happens to him at tender ages. And he grows still. He experiences things. But he's not telling somebody, do things because of what I went through. He's saying, I understand where you're coming from, so this is what you need to do. Allah Azza wa Jal, He tells us in the Quran, وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ, that we have guided you to the two najd. And the najd, it's a pathway, but it's a real hard path to travel. It's not an easy roadway. It's one that's tough to traverse. And after that verse, he says, فَلَقْتَحَمَ الْعَقَبَةِ, who's going to reach the Aqaba at the end of that najd? The Aqaba in the Arabic language, it makes reference to that place that is between the two hills, the valley in between two hills, or the summit of a mountaintop, that people, when they were seeking sanctuary from harm, they would go and find that sanctuary in that area. So he says, we have guided you to these two najd. But most of you, they're not going to make it to that Aqaba. You're not going to know how to make a decision when you get to that crossroads and go in one direction or the next. You're not going to know what to put into your thought process. You're stifled, you're incapacitated, you're paralyzed because everything is seen through right and wrong. And it's not like that. Every decision is not a right or wrong decision, and somehow then a halal or haram decision. Some decisions are just decisions, and what they will yield you is more decisions. And you have to be able to be comfortable in engaging that. What made the companions good was not that they were good when everything going around them was going well, but they were good because when they fell on their face, they knew how to get back up on their feet, and they knew how to help each other get back up on their feet. They weren't a people who sought to elevate themselves by denigrating each other. But they were there for each other at the most trying of times. So the question doesn't come up that often of why. Because they didn't create that kind of atmosphere or environment. They didn't let a person feel as if they had to be alone or by themselves. They didn't look a person up and down and say that this is why you're not good enough, this is why you're not good enough. When they weren't qualified to talk about a subject, they didn't speak about it. But when somebody comes to ask of us, we tell them whatever we feel like telling them. The Prophet ﷺ, he finds himself in a situation where he undertakes what we know as the Treaty of Udaipur. The Muslims, for the first time in a long time, are going from Medina to Makkah al-Mukarramah, going back home, going to be with their families, their loved ones, their homes, their possessions, their belongings. Not only that, they're going to make pilgrimage. And along the way, the deal is brokered. And the Prophet says, remove your ihram, slaughter your animals, we're going back to Medina. The companions don't listen. Umar radiallahu ta'ala an says to the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam, Alasna bil muslimin wa alaysu bil mushrikeen, that are we not the Muslims? Are they not the mushrik? Why are we making deals with them? So the Prophet doesn't know what to do. He goes into his tent and he asks his wife, they're not listening to me. What am I supposed to do? She says that you do it, and if they see you do it, then they're going to surely do it as well. So the Prophet ﷺ goes, and he does first what he was telling them to do, and they see him do it, and so they do it also. But you want to think about it in the frame of what we are discussing right now. When the Prophet doesn't know what to do, he has somebody to go and ask. He goes and asks somebody who understands him, who knows him, who gets where he's coming from. This is his wife. She gives him the advice. He follows the advice, and it makes sense. When you're trying to ask this question of why, ask it of a person who makes sense. And if somebody is asking you this question, why, be a person that it made sense that they asked you. Don't give them a response that you believe you're supposed to say. Don't give them a response that you heard somebody standing on this side of the podium saying a lecture with 1,000 other people. But hone in on their reality, hone in on where they're coming from, and give them an answer that makes sense where they're coming from. And if you're not the person who can do it, then don't answer the question. I was 19 years old as an undergrad at New York University, the first time I met a young woman who was a victim of domestic violence. This girl was an undergrad, and she came into our school, our class, with makeup on her face. And of course you had some of the brothers and sisters who had to point out that makeup is haram. So when I spoke to her and I talked to her and I said, what is it that you are doing? What's going on? Because she had bruises on her face. She made some story up about how she fell. I said, you don't fall and get bruises like that. And as we spoke more, and she told me that her father had hit her the night before. And she let it all out about the situation, what she was going through. And now she's standing in front of me, looking for answers. I had no idea what to tell her. I didn't know who to direct her to. I didn't know who to refer her to. I had no idea what to say to her. And it didn't change the fact that she was going through what she was going through. What would you do in that situation? 18 years of age, 17 years of age, 19, 20, 25, 30, any of us, what would we do? Would you tell her that this was a test from Allah? Would you tell her, be patient? That the people who came before you went through much worse? Is that how you would empower her? The question is not of why is this happening to me, but the question we should ask ourselves is when it happens to someone else, why are we not doing anything about it? Why, when we know that people are going through these predicaments, they're going through these situations, we are not dedicating ourselves to the development and establishment of real institutions and resources so that people don't have to go through these things? We've turned our deen into a weapon where we look people up and down and we say, you are not good enough to be a Muslim. You don't dress the way a Muslim looks. You don't act the way a Muslim acts. By my my criteria, you are not someone who is deserving to be from the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Does the Prophet talk like that? Does he treat people in that manner? Does he let anybody believe that they are not the center of his world when he is engaging them and interacting with them? The one time the Prophet turns away from somebody, revelation comes down directly, don't do that. How many hearts have you turned away? How many people have you pushed away? How many who are longing for a place to fit in, a place to belong, a place to be understood? How are you welcoming them into your community? Some people go through some really, really tough things. I'll give you some concrete examples. They might be a little bit hard to digest, but they're reality. It becomes interesting when I do counseling in my office because for whatever reason, it seems as if many different people who are going through the same issue come in all at once, in a week, in a month. So about 1.5 years ago, there was about 3 or 4 young women who came to me in the time span of 2 weeks. And as they sat down, the tears began to roll off of their face. They began to shudder, they began to shake. And as the words crept out of their mouths, and they began to speak about things that they hadn't uttered to anyone for, in some instances, more than 2 decades. When I was 4 years old, when I was 5 years old, when I was 7 years old, my parents would send me to a Quran teacher. And for the 1 year, 2 years, 3 years that I read Quran with this man that my parents thought was good because he had memorized the Quran and somehow that is a qualifying term to equate to goodness in an individual. Each and every time I was there with him, he would put his hands on me. He would touch me in ways that I didn't understand. And it didn't happen once, it didn't happen twice, it happened for months, which turned into years. And as the tears come out, and the tears come out, and they're flowing and flowing, the question that comes each and every time, why did Allah allow for this to happen to me? You gonna tell her that a 5-year-old was being tested by God? You gotta think about this. You gotta think about the impact your words have on people. You have to think about the way your interactions have an impact on people. The Prophet ﷺ, he espoused compassion and mercy and humility. He was a person who knew how to connect to those who were around him. How do you let people come into your circles? How do you let people be where you are at? How is your Islam not of a benefit to you, but of a benefit to the people who are blessed to meet you? Why is you being a Muslim good to anybody else? Think about it. This man, he smiled at people when he saw them. This man, he encouraged us to spread love by greeting one another. This man, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, never turned his back on anybody when they were speaking to him. Can you imagine? Can you imagine what a beautiful man this must have been? Can you imagine at a time when people didn't know how to honor the rights of any individuals, what he was bringing to the table? You can't really give answers when people are trying to understand why. It's really, really tough. We don't know. You have to be comfortable within our theology to be able to ultimately say, we don't know why this happened. We don't know why this went on. We don't know why there's the existence of famine and rape and warfare and conflict. We don't know. But what we do know is what we're able to do despite it. What we do know is what we have control over in terms of our deeds, our decisions, our actions, the way that we engage and interact with one another. Do you get what I'm saying? I'll give you an example. Haroon and I led a group of about 100 people for Umrah a couple of years ago during our university's spring break. We take people every year for Umrah in March. And so the first time we did this, I was giving a lecture in Toronto a couple of days before, and I had eaten some bad sushi and I got food poisoning. So I'm sitting in my bed, and it's not to be gross, but I vomited about 13 times. I called someone and said, I can't give the khutbah today at Jummah because I just vomited 13 times. And the brother on the phone was like, oh, mashallah, that's great news. I'm like, what are you talking about, man? And he was like, Allah is just purifying your body. I was like, you're stupid. And so Haroon, he took the group by himself. And in my mind now, I'm thinking about everything I've heard at pretty much every lecture about Umrah and Hajj. Only the chosen few are invited to Allah's house. Only the ones who are most beloved to the divine get an invitation to His house. The ones who deserve it, the ones who are elevated and dignified in a certain way, those are the ones who get invited. So why was I not being invited? I wanted to be there so badly. One day passed, I couldn't get on the plane. My temperature hit 104 degrees. They wouldn't let me on. A second day passed. And by now, this time, I'm sitting in my parents' home in New Jersey. And the way my work goes, I don't really get to see my family that often. And so, what started off in my thoughts as Allah does not want me to go visit His beloved in Medina ended in, I've spent the last 2.5 days sitting at home with nobody bothering me in the presence of my mother and my father. It was a different kind of peace and a different kind of tranquility. My temperature went down. I was able to get on a plane. I got to Medina with 10 hours left. And then we took whatever we took, I think a bus to Mecca, and we performed our Umrah. But the process in and of itself was one that was really hard to identify for me what actually was going on in terms of Allah's plan. One brother thought I was being purified. I thought I was being punished. And then I thought, this is a great, amazing thing. I'm sitting at home, eating my mom's cooking, and laying my head in her lap. Which one was it? Do we know? No, we don't know. That's the whole point. We don't know. We can't say 100% definitively, this is why this happened. So when somebody asks you the question, why me, Allah? You can't give them a definitive answer that resonates within you to such an extent that you become complacent. Because your complacency will put you in a place where it will yield passivity. You won't really help that person as much as you can. Someone comes trying to think about why they've gone through what they've gone through, you help them get to a place where self-esteem and self-confidence is something that they believe they can have again. Someone's trying to understand for themselves why they went through what they went through. You be a resource for them so that they can understand that they can be at their best again. We don't deal with emotions well. If someone is sad or someone is upset, it doesn't mean that they are weak of faith. The Prophet ﷺ cried when his son died. We have a year in the seerah that our teachers call the year of depression, the year of grief, because Khadija radiallahu ta'ala anha passes away, and the uncle of the Prophet, Abu Talib, passes away. If the Prophet is able to get sad and he is able to have a year that is called the year of grief, we're not going to say that he's a bad Muslim because he got sad, are we? So don't say that somebody else is weak in their faith if they get emotional about something that they're going through. Pain is subjective. You can't tell me that I'm not entitled to hurt about something if it hurts me. Just because it doesn't hurt you, I'm not you. I'm me. And if you tell me I'm wrong, you're going to push me to a place where I'm going to feel more and more isolated. Muslim communities are not healthy communities because Muslims are not happy. And we're not happy because we don't have people to talk to. Be a person that someone can come and speak to. Be a person who someone can take as a confidant. Be somebody's companion. Be a real resource, a real friend to them. Don't get tied up in the supposed to's and the have to's and these kinds of things. If you really understand a person when they're in need and they get pushed to a certain extent, I'm talking a lot, how much time do we have? We have a hadith that most of us probably know that involves 3 men who were in a cave. How many of you know this hadith? The men are in the cave, the boulder comes to the front of the cave, and they make a decision that by our actions that we have done for the sake of Allah, we will make dua, and we will ask Him that, Ya Rabb, if we did this for your sake, then move the boulder out of the way. Do most of you know this hadith? The second person who makes dua in this situation is a man who is in love with his cousin who is a female. The female cousin is in a situation where he keeps throwing himself at her, saying that, have a relationship with me, and she keeps saying no. She gets to a place where, in the hadith we're told, a famine comes upon her, and she needs some money. So he says, I'll give you 120 dinars, but you have to spend the night with me. He gives her the money. She takes it. The night comes. And as he gets closer to her, and he gets closer to her, she says, have fear of Allah. That if you are going to come upon me, come in a lawful way. And the consciousness hits his mind. And when it hits his mind, he realizes what he is doing. And he stops before he does that which is haram. And he says, Ya Rabb, if I did this for your sake, then move this rock a little bit. And the rock moves. And for those of you who were at the khutbah at Masjid Hamza today, this furthers the point where the Prophet says, "Ittaqil maharim takun abadan nas." That refrain from that which is haram, you will be the most virtuous of people. But what we want to understand from this scenario is we want to go back to this woman. This woman who she finds herself in a situation where she's been saying no to this man. No, I won't be with you. No, I won't spend the night with you. No, I won't do this thing. It's not something that she wants to do. But now when she is in need, when she doesn't have necessities, when she doesn't have outlets that she is in need of, she has no choice. She needs food. She's struck by famine. What are her other options? So everything that she has said no to thus far, all of a sudden, yes, I'll give you that night that you want. How else is she going to feed herself? When a person is in need, they push themselves in places where they can do whatever they can to make themselves feel whole again. And you want to understand this from the perspective of the person who is in need of understanding and reconciliation of why did I go through what I went through. They will look for outlets to help them feel whole again, to feel good again, to feel well again. And the way that we respond to these individuals will have an impact on what kind of outlets they will go and seek beyond their interaction with us. When Muslims drink alcohol, it's not because always they're bad Muslims. Sometimes they don't have people to talk to about why their life is tough. When some Muslims turn to drugs, they turn to sexuality, they turn to all different kinds of things that if we were to see somebody do this, we would surely turn our nose against them. Sometimes it's because they don't feel so good inside, and we're not helping them make themselves feel better. A young woman came to see me who had been forced into a marriage that Her father didn't care about her degree, her credentials, or anything. But he said, you will marry somebody from our village back home. It's a totally different topic, but if you don't want to get married to someone, don't get married to them. This girl is forced into this marriage against her will. She's put on a plane and sent elsewhere. And she says that the emotional abuse, in addition to the physical abuse that I sustained at the hands of this man, was so much. I never wanted to be with him at all. It felt as if every night that he came to me to be with me physically, I was being raped. Because there was no desire for me to be in a place where his hands could touch me. Day in and day out we went. There was times when he wouldn't give me any money to clean my clothes. There was times when I wouldn't be able to eat the same food that the rest of his family ate. There were times when weeks would go by, he wouldn't even say a word to me. This was her reality for years. And when she goes to her family back home that helped me out of this situation, no, the dignity and pride and honor of our family is more important. You stay in that relationship. She finally musters up the strength to leave him. She comes back and she sits in my office. Nobody will help me. Everybody keeps telling me that it is my religious duty to stay with this man. Why would Islam make it so difficult for me to divorce this person? The questions come out. She gave me a diary that she kept every single day that she was married to this man. She said, read this. This is what my life has been. As I sat and I digested it all, I said to her, how do you deal with this? How do you cope with it? She said, what do you mean? I said, you have been through so much. There's no way that you're just kind of taking it. What do you do to cope? She says, my life has been hell for weeks, for years. All I feel is pain when I'm awake. All I remember in my wakeful moments is this man, and when I'm asleep, all I remember in my thoughts are what happened to me as well. Why is it then wrong for me for a few moments out of the day to drink something or smoke something that causes me to lose my consciousness or reality just for a little bit so I don't feel that pain anymore? I'm not saying it's halal to drink or get high. Don't get the wrong idea. Would your natural reaction be to tell this girl that what she's doing is haram? Would you say to her that this is just a test from God, be patient? People have gone through much worse who came before you. How would you respond to her? Would you give her a place in your community? She used to wear a headscarf. She took it off. Would you even give her a step in because she wasn't dressed the way that you thought she should be? Even before you knew her story, even before where she came from or anything, you saw her, you stereotyped her, you archetyped her, you gave a sweeping generalization. She's not good because of the way she dresses. Just because she doesn't have her arm in a sling or is sitting in a wheelchair where you can see the physical pain upon her, doesn't mean she's not hurting inside. You gotta think. People go through things. Everyone's reality is not the same. And if there are those of you who are in this place where you have gone through something, don't keep it to yourself. Be smart about the person you talk to about it though as well. It can be really, really difficult. We get many people who ask us questions all the time. We can't really help them. I had a man call me up where he wanted to get married. And Haroon knows this as well. So he says, I hear you know a lot of women, Khalid. I said, oh great, that's my reputation. Can you introduce me to someone? I said, how did you even get my cell phone number? She said, what are you looking for? He says, I want to marry a Muslim girl. I said, okay, that's great. I said, can you give me something else? He says, somebody who will be nice to my parents. I say, oh, that's good. I was going to introduce you to someone who will be a jerk to your parents. Don't know how to make decisions. I don't know anything about that boy. How will I help him meet somebody? The person who stands here doesn't always know what you're going through. So you can't take this person as being the one to always give you advice on how to live your life. The Prophet stood in front of 120,000 of his companions when he gave his farewell khutbah. Do we think for a moment he didn't know all of their names, if not at least most of their names? If I don't know your reality, how will I tell you how to do things that don't have a legalistic answer to them? If I don't know what you have gone through, I don't know what kind of impact my words will have upon you. We need to turn to people with a different air of responsibility. And we have to be more responsible in the way that we treat one another. The question of why something has happened is not a wrong question in our tradition. What becomes wrong, though, is how we respond when that question of why is posed to us in some way, shape, or form. It's a very simple message. Just treat people nicely. You don't know what they've been through. Treat them with respect. Treat them with dignity. Treat them the way that humans should be treating one another. We don't know what has happened to others. And even if nothing has happened to them, you can still treat them nicely. You don't have to treat them badly just because they have a great life. This is what the Prophet ﷺ has taught us. The merciful one is merciful to those who are merciful. Be merciful on the earth. The one who is in the heavens will be merciful to you. Epitomize that mercy. Try your best to be that individual who understands that they have been sent as a representative of the divine on this earth. You don't want to be the person who, when you meet somebody, they're left wondering, is there even a God? But you embody the characteristics that you can to the best of your ability, so that when someone meets you and interacts with you, they know that despite whoever they met, there was the most wretched example of creation. After meeting you, they still have some semblance of hope, because you are a person who espouses compassion, understanding, and wisdom when you engage a person coming from any walk of life, regardless if they are male or female, young or old, black, white, brown, or yellow, whether they were born in a different country or born in this one. That's the legacy of our Prophet. We have to ask ourselves if we are owning up to it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guide us and protect us. May He bless us with knowledge that benefits us. May He bless us with a tawfiq to understand and implement that knowledge into our daily lives. And may He guide and bless us all. Wallahu ta'ala alam wa billahi tawfiq. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil mursaleen Sayyidina Muhammad. Assalamu alaikum. How's everyone doing? You with me? Alright, I'm going to be deep and intense and academic. You find you can't follow along, I have no sympathy for you. That's just something you're going to have to deal with. And that's how I am. I'm just kidding. I'm a nice guy. Why are we laughing? You know, when I got the topic was Why Me Allah? And I decided to change the title a little bit, because that's my prerogative, to Why Us Allah? Because I think that as much as the question of theodicy, of not knowing why God is doing what He's doing, why we face what we face, is individual, it's also collective. And especially when you come from a place where you have a strong identity as part of a community, both locally and internationally, the question of why you go through what you go through becomes a question that, why do we go through what we go through? And I want to start with a little bit of a mind twister. A few days ago in Egypt, mostly Islamist parties swept the first round of elections. In Morocco, a few weeks before that, there were elections and an Islamist party won. In Libya, we've heard that the new regime wants to incorporate elements of Sharia law, Islamic finance, so on and so forth. Turkey has been under the rule of an Islamist party for the past 10 years. Tunisia saw the election of Ennahda, which is an Islamist party. This all happened, not Turkey, but these countries in North Africa, this all happened in less than a year. And it started when a man lit himself on fire. He committed suicide, and his suicide led to the overthrow of some of the most oppressive regimes in Muslim history. And the overthrow of those regimes led to the election of governments that want to bring Islam back to a place of pride in their societies. Whatever you think of the agendas, I'm not endorsing the agendas. My point is that an action that is universally considered by Islam to be haram, suicide, leads to this. And how do we make sense of that? How is it that one man's suicide, and not just a suicide, he lights himself on fire, sparks this? And there's a picture of the dictator of Tunisia, Ben Ali, who, when he realized that the protests going on in his country were not something he could dismiss, he went to visit Bouazizi in the hospital. And if you look up the picture on Google, the face of the doctor is one of sheer horror. Because it's believed by most people that Bouazizi was already dead. And he had staged this photo to make it look like he was visiting him when he was ill. Because if people realized that he was visiting him after he died, and that he had himself actually died, it would make the situation even worse. That's kind of wild, right? How do we make sense of that? I made sense of it because I predicted the Arab Spring. So you're going to laugh, right? But I'm serious. And I want to share this with you because it's not just self-congratulation, it goes somewhere. I wrote this book in 2006. In this book, set in Egypt, a bunch of folks light themselves on fire in order to overthrow the government of Hosni Mubarak. And I want to read a passage to you because it's kind of creeping me out. The passage takes place in a dream that the main character has after these suicides, the last of which takes place, if you know Cairo, on Jamiat al-Dawla al-Arabiya, the avenue of the League of Arab States, which has generally been a rather big disappointment, both the avenue and the League of Arab States. A good 10 minutes later, we were done and made our way down the stairs and past Ahmed. Ahmed is the manager of a McDonald's. He waved hesitatingly in our direction, and he pointed cautiously to the exit. "What is it?" I asked. Haris, he's the main character's roommate, clutched my arm tight enough to cut off the circulation. "Look," he said, pointing. His voice faded away as he saw my eyes move towards the door. We rushed out in excitement, finding ourselves stuck in a crowd, a huge crowd, that ended only a few feet from the door. There must have been tens of thousands of Egyptians, their fists like minarets held up to the sky. Giant posters draped over both sides of the Nabila Hotel screaming populist might. The crowd was marching for Mustafa Mahmoud. A smaller contingent made north, while rumors circulated of mobs on the bridges in Zamalek, Do'i, Khan al-Khalili. But the view to anywhere was obstructed by hundreds of flags for Egypt and Palestine together. Voices joined a swelling chorus, and we knew then and there that this was going to change Egypt, and from Egypt outwards, till what happened in front of a McDonald's would consume the Ummah. We spotted a crowd of Egyptians huddled around several TVs, broadcasting updates from Al Jazeera as soon as they came through. Common soldiers were establishing justice, arresting members of the corrupt elite, criminals who had hidden behind the trappings of power for far too long. Some of the aristocrats even arrested themselves, an event enjoyed by all. Mubarak conceded defeat, stepped down, and elections were called for the month of Muharram, which by the way is when they started, so I'm cool. A new year and a new Egypt. Because Allah has given us freedom, the rector of Al-Azhar announced, as a council came together to draft a constitution for the Islamic Republic of Egypt. To this more cheers went up, but even these were fast lost in a general roar. Now, one, that's a little bit weird that happened, but there's a reason it happened. Because when I went to Egypt, I came to terms with something about myself. Probably everyone in this room and if you look at the spread of American Islam generally, comes from a background of people who have been on the wrong end of imperialism. Whether you are African American, an immigrant, or immigrant heritage, your recent or past history has, of late, been pretty rough, contrasted with a history that was supposedly very good. If you are familiar with the Jewish community, the great challenge of the Jewish community morally, the question of why does this happen, is the Holocaust. How do you make sense of a God that you worship allowing half your community to die? Just imagine that. In the span of 5 years. And for Muslims, I would argue it's colonialism. We have not been able to come to terms as an ummah with what happened to us. Because after the birth of Islam, very quickly, Muslims established dominant civilizations. And there were reverses and defeats and expulsions. But for over 1,000 years, the world's wealthiest and most sophisticated civilizations were Muslim. You can talk about Timbuktu. Moscow was under Muslim rule. Persian was the official language of the courts of China for over a century. Muslims founded Manila, which is the capital of the Philippines. Muslims traded with Aborigines in northern Australia. This was a huge universe, founded by a conviction that our prosperity must come from our belief in God and our acceptance of the final message. And then in the 18th century, it went horribly wrong. Out of nowhere, they weren't just defeats, but total and complete subjugation, followed by huge and horrific amounts of violence. The British entered Bengal in the 1750s and 60s, and in the next 30 years, 30% of the population of Bengal dies of famine. The Italians occupied Libya in the early 20th century, starting in 1911. A little bit weird because it's exactly 100 years since then. 1911 they come in, 25% of the population of Libya dies. If you want to put that in perspective, Germany, which lost World War II, lost 10% of its population in World War II. West Africa was decimated by a slave trade that took place over hundreds of years and kidnapped hundreds of thousands of people, many of whom died. And for Muslims all across the Muslim world, the question became, why is Allah letting this happen to us? And people assumed that it must be because they're not sufficiently religious, so you had reformist movements that went from one end of the Muslim world to another, all trying to fix things, all trying to go back to where we used to be. And all of these movements seemed to fail. People turned to communism and nationalism and Islamism and one ideology after another, but the general condition of the Muslim world tended to be one of continuous defeat, subjugation, and humiliation. And I would argue that this is not something that is from our Islam, obviously, but it suffuses our Islam. There is anger, there is discontent, there is incomprehension. And this emotional aspect, which is entirely understandable and is not exclusive to Muslims, but can be found among peoples who were colonized all over the world, is translated into our Islam because we held on to our Islam. So our Islam has become the Islam of people who are angry, who are displaced, and who can't figure out why. After all, if you believe in Allah, and you accept the final message of Muhammad, peace be upon him, why would Allah put you through this? Why would He make your societies, or let them become so bad, that they are an embarrassment? If you look at all the indices of development and progress and education and human rights, the Muslim world tends to rank all the way on the bottom. It's as if a complete inversion has happened from societies that in the 700s had lighted streets and huge libraries, and I'll give you an anecdote to make sense of this. The largest libraries in Western Europe were a few hundred books in the 8th, 9th, 10th centuries. The largest library in Cordoba, the capital of Muslim Spain, was 400,000. And there were over 1,000 libraries in the city, most of them held by private individuals. How does a culture like that turn into this? And it's something we hear all the time. We used to be so great. We used to be so powerful, right? When you look at an ad for India, what's the symbol of India that everybody sees? Taj Mahal, right? When the British first saw the Taj Mahal, they actually argued that the Italians built it, because they said there was no way that a bunch of Muslims could have built it. And if you go to the Muslim world today, you probably agree with them. You're like, yeah, we can't really figure out a shoe rack, so, probably not going to happen, right? It's true, it's like really sad. And I think that I have seen in Muslims two responses. A lot of Muslims get angry. And they think that their anger is directed at whoever is oppressing them, whether real or perceived, whoever is humiliating them, whether real or perceived. But in fact, the anger is directed at God. Because if you are furious with your condition in the world, you are in essence unhappy with where God has put you. You refuse to accept the condition you live in. Many of us would have liked to tie belief in Islam to prosperity in the world, because it's a nice equation. It's an easy equation. Many people can be Muslim when Muslims are on top of the world. It's a lot harder to be on the bottom. And the sense of being a victim is something that captures you and seizes you and takes you in. The other response a lot of Muslims have is to become so frustrated, embarrassed, humiliated, angered, enraged, that they walk away from their Islam. Because they say, on the one hand, the Imam is telling me that this is the truth, and yet when I look at my communities, when I look at our countries, there's no way this is the truth. So there's got to be something wrong. And so they walk away. Sometimes explicitly, sometimes implicitly. Many times, because of the kind of culture we have, which is a very religious culture, they won't say it. And I didn't realize the extent of this until the last year or two. And I'll give you just one example. I was in upstate New York earlier this spring. And a guy comes up to me at the masjid who I saw hanging out with all the other MSA kids. And he says, I want to talk to you later tonight. Can I have your phone number? I gave him Khalid. No, I'm joking. He was that guy, dude. About the marriage thing? Sorry. I'm just checking if you're paying attention. Khalid, meanwhile, was doing his homework. So he says, I want to talk to you. I said, all right. I said, whenever you want to talk. He calls me around 1:30 in the morning. I figure it's fine. I only have to drive home the next morning. It's 5 hours away. I don't need sleep. I am super Muslim. And he comes in, and it was actually kind of cute because it was like endearing. He came in with like Famous Amos cookies and like Twinkies, and he was like, oh, if you're hungry, like, yeah, it was nice. Like, he brought snacks because he wanted to hang out and talk. And he said to me straight up, and I was actually happy he was comfortable enough to say this, he said, I don't believe in God. I was like, I saw you at the masjid. And you were praying. He's like, yeah, I go to the masjid. He's like, I love the Muslim community. I call myself Muslim, but I don't believe in God. I don't see the point. And the more I travel place to place, I find that that's more frequent than I would have imagined. That there are Muslims who don't want to believe in God or can't understand how. And he inspired me to start writing a book again. If you've ever written a book or want to write a book, it's like a horrific experience. It's actually kind of like vomiting. Because you have to do it, and you know that once you get it out of the way, you'll feel better, but like while you're doing it, it's the worst feeling in the world, right? Because it's just sitting there, and it's like, put this down on paper, but you don't want to, and then when you do, alhamdulillah, it's a little bit better. But he made me want to start writing because I thought I should tell my story. Because why do we shy away from these questions if people are feeling them? Where are they going to go for answers? They're just going to go to people from other religious communities who had somewhat parallel experiences, and that's what they're going to get. And they're going to assume that whatever someone felt in their tradition or their community is and must be the reality of our community. When I was growing up, I grew up in a household that was very religious. I also grew up in a household that was very Pakistani. Some of you are like, he's Pakistani. I get in trouble sometimes, like sometimes I make Desi jokes, and one uncle came up to me who was so angry. He's like, who the hell are you to make jokes? And I was like, I'm Pakistani. He's like, oh, okay, it's fine. So then that was cool, right? And when I was growing up, I couldn't distinguish between my ethnic identity and my religious identity. So I fiercely defended being Muslim in a way that was defensive and wounded and scared and angry. Because it was the same as defending the fact that I'm not part of the world around me. I was the only Muslim kid. There was one Jewish kid in my high school, Everybody else was white and Christian. It was pretty lonely. Basically, it stunk. And I didn't know how to relate. And so my Islam was my identity. There was nothing there. But everyone around me seemed to be awesome Muslims. They pray 5 times a day. They fast every day in Ramadan. They were excited to go to the masjid, right? Like they enjoyed Eid at the masjid, which is really saying something for your ability to, take pain. Our holidays are so boring. I'm just saying, we need to step it up a little bit and make it more fun. And I didn't disbelieve in the concept of an afterlife. But I was convinced I was going to go to hell. Because I couldn't do anything that people around me were doing. And so I thought to myself, if that's what it takes to be a good Muslim, I can never get there. I'd try and try and try, but I'd fall on my face. And there's a scene in Malcolm X's autobiography where it says that even after he learns about the Nation of Islam, he can't get himself to bow down on the ground. To humble himself like that was the hardest thing in the world because there was so much pride. And that's what I felt, but I didn't know what it was because there was no one to tell me what I was feeling. And I felt at the same time the sense that my religion was something I could never handle. It was too big for me, it was too much for me, it was too hard. But it was also the religion that was my identity, and if I let go of it, then I would be betraying my people. The color of my skin, my ethnicity, everything about me. And this history of people who had been defeated. And when you feel yourself a victim, you're going to hold on to that as tightly as you can. And it was only later that I realized that that is not an unusual sentiment. So I want to read to you some passages from a poem by Allama Iqbal. I'm going to read the English, because I'm assuming a lot of you don't understand Urdu. And it's basically a poem he wrote in the early 20th century when there was a war between the Ottoman Empire and Bulgaria. And at this point, the Ottoman Empire, which is technically the Caliphate at this time, is basically like the last independent Muslim state. Everything else has been conquered. And he writes a poem called Complaint. And some of the very conservative ulama, they freak out and they say, you can't publish this kind of thing, you can't say these kinds of things. And we don't know what Iqbal actually said because we just kind of quote him to death and we don't really think about what he was saying. He was expressing anger with God. And he recited this poem in Jama Masjid in Delhi in front of tens of thousands of people, and they sold copies, and the copies sold out. Because he's looking at the world that he lives in, and everywhere Muslims are being defeated, and he can't make sense of it. And when he recites this poem, everybody feels what he's feeling. So I want to read to you a little bit of it in English, and hopefully it does something to convey the flavor of it. The translation that I have is by Khushwant Singh. It's actually like a pretty bad translation, but we'll try. So this is Shikwa. This is several passages in, where he's basically saying, he's addressing himself to God, he's speaking to God directly. Shikwa in Urdu, as in Arabic, it means complaint. So he says, we won renown for submitting to your will, and it is so. We speak out now, we are compelled to repeat our tale of woe. We are like the silent lute, whose chords are full of voice. When grief wells to our lips, we speak. Do we have any choice? Lord God, we are your faithful servants. For a while, bear with us. It is in our nature to praise you, so please hear also a small complaint. In the midst of raging battle, if the time came to pray, the Hijazis turned to Mecca, kissed the earth, and stepped away from the fray. Sultan and slave in single file, side by side. There was no servant and no master, nothing to divide. Between serf and lord, needy and rich, no difference. When they appeared in your court, they came as equals in one. In this banquet hall of time and space, from dawn to dusk we spent, filled with the wine of faith, like goblets round we went. Over hills and plains we took your message. This was our task. Do you know of an occasion we failed you, is all we ask. Over wastes and wilderness, land and sea, even to the Atlantic we galloped forward. We blotted out the smear of falsehood from the pages of history, freed humanity from chains of slavery. We swept the floors of the Kaaba with our foreheads. The Quran you sent us, we held tightly to our chests. Even so, you accuse us of lack of faith on our part. If we lacked faith, you have done little to win our heart. There are people of other faiths, some of them transgressors. Some are humble, some are ignorant, some endowed with mind. Hundreds of others there are who despair even of your name. Your blessings are showered on the homes of unbelievers all. Only on the poor Muslim your wrath like lightning falls. In the temples of idolatry, the idols say, the Muslims are gone. They rejoice that the guardians of the Kaaba have withdrawn. The Quran tucked under their arms they have departed. These smile and smirk at us, are you aware? For the message of your oneness, do you any more care? Our complaint is not that they are rich, that their treasure overflows. They who have no manners, and of anything decent do not know. What injustice, here and now treasure and palaces to infidels given, while the poor Muslim is promised these things only after he goes to heaven. Neither favor nor kindness is shown to us anymore. Where is the affection you showed us long before? And this is a poem that people share a lot without necessarily understanding what he's saying. And this emotion, it's uncomfortable to hear, is an emotion that tapped into what a lot of people were feeling. And I would argue it comes from a few different places. The first is that we have so romanticized our history that we have a view that is black or white. Either everything or nothing. And if we can't have everything, then we should have nothing. If we cannot build up, we tear down. We imagine that in the earlier time of Islam, everybody was perfect, never had any problems, never had any challenges. The first some of the conversations that Khalid mentioned, for example, that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had with his companions, I was blown away. Nobody ever told me these things. Nobody ever told me that there were instances in which companions would drink and the Prophet, peace be upon him, would punish them for drinking, and then, do you know where they went? They sat down next to him. Because once they had been reprimanded, they were still part of a community. And we don't have that anymore. And so on the one hand, history looms over us like a weight we can never hold up. On the other hand, our religion is something that we are taught is so hard to do that except for a handful of us, it becomes so impossible, we want to shove it all away. And that's why you see so many Muslims who are unable to walk into a mosque. Because they are made to think that the minute they walk into that mosque, they have to do everything from that day forward perfectly, and if they don't, they're doomed. That's common. This is what people think. It's never about how do you get to a better place, how do you train yourself, how do you commit to something small, how do you find a mentor. Somehow you've got to figure it out. The second thing is we have lost an emotional connection. So when I was in high school, I got so sick of this tension that I decided I would give up on Islam. I was just going to walk away. I wasn't going to tell my parents because my dad would just, he's a big man. So I was going to kind of keep it on the DL for a while and then figure it out later. And I decided that I would look into other religions. So I started doing research. And I thought it wouldn't be fair to commit to any religion unless you've studied all of them. Because otherwise, how do you know? And the thing that attracted me was Christianity. Firstly, because everyone around me was Christian. And secondly, because what they always said was love. Right? Jesus loves you. And nobody ever used the word love in my masjid. So I was like, I want somebody to love me, give me a hug, make me feel good, go snowboarding with me. I was in New England, you know. You guys don't know what snow is, right? Do you know what that is? It's like rain, but different. It also tastes like chocolate. And something stopped me. Because as I thought about it, I said to myself, if I accept this message, then what do I do with Muhammad, peace be upon him? Because if I say I'm walking away from this, then essentially what I'm saying is that man is a liar. Maybe he had good intentions, but essentially what he was telling people he must have made up. And I couldn't do that. The thing that kept me and brought me back a different way than the way I came was the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. That I knew all the stories, and I knew that the people around him loved him. I mean, if you just think of a few of the people around him, take the Prophet, peace be upon him, out of the picture for a second. if you take someone like Abu Bakr, Umar, Aisha, right? In and of themselves, these people in any time period would shake the world, right? And they all put themselves before him. And that's really something. Someone like Umar, right, who becomes a Khalifa, under whose rule he builds an empire that his people have never seen before, is willing to say Abu Bakr is a better Muslim than me. He's willing to put himself behind someone else. Why? Because he loves the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And he loves him so much, he believes in his message, and he's willing to do whatever it takes. That's what brought it back for me. It was an emotional connection. And that's something, unfortunately, we don't give people. I'm not saying faith is irrational or any of those things, and we can have a long, boring, philosophical discussion if you want. What I'm saying is that people don't find themselves part of a religion unless they are part of its community. And they will not be part of the community unless they feel welcome there. And they will not be welcome there if there's no one to say salam to them. And so for me, it was literally me in my room, reading these books, thinking, what do I do with Muhammad? Where does he fit in this picture? And it was later on that I was reading, it's a Persian book of poetry by Allama Iqbal. It's called Javid Nama, the Book of Eternity. And he has a line in there which is really powerful. When I read it, it kind of just hit me. And you know, sometimes something hits you and you feel like the room is spinning and it takes you a long time to figure out what just happened. He said, you can deny God, but you can't deny Muhammad. And what he meant was, it's easy for anyone to say, I don't believe in something I don't see. But if someone is exposed to the life of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, if someone sees what that was, they can't refute that. And it was kind of creeping me out, because that was exactly what had happened to me.
Contrasting the speech Imam Khalid Latif gave, I was thinking about the theme, and I was thinking how, am I perfect enough to say that, why me, why am I not being treated the way I should be? And I was thinking in that sense, and I felt I wasn't. So I kind of wanted to flip it to where, why me am I being blessed with many things, and I'm not being the best Muslim that I can be? So with that in mind, I thought what my mom told me, and I told her, I came home one day, and I had a lot of great news. I told her I got this new internship, I got this new job, I got these good grades, and she asked me, have you been praying your 5 times prayer? Have you been opening your Quran every day? And I couldn't confidently say, yes to every one of those questions. And she said, is this a good thing, or is this a punishment? Am I receiving what I get in the world? Am I going to receive this in the afterlife? So once I found that, I was like, you know what, me and Faraz, I talked to Faraz, I'm like, we need to make a nasheed, because this is something I've been feeling for a long time before I even knew about the theme. So hopefully, maybe it might relate to some of you guys. When I was writing it, it kind of motivated me again. Like, I remember I was writing it, and I was thinking about it in the car, and I was like, wait, what time is it? It's prayer time, I should stop. So maybe it might help you guys. And we did not know there's going to be one mic, so hopefully you guys can hear us. Always busy for Allah, but I make some time for others. The holy book Quran sits on my shelf and I don't bother to even look at it. How do I call myself a Muslim? Alarm went off for Fajr, but I just clicked the snooze button. Still you were always there. You gave me air to breathe, the clothes that's on my back. You gave me eyes to see, and gave me a home and food. Came with the family, treated just like a king. Living so problem-free, so why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh, why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh, why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh, why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh. Losing my temper left and right, I disrespect my parents. Backbiting about others became somewhat of a habit.
But the Prophet always taught us to have patience and compassion. I raised my hands up to Allah and asked Him for forgiveness. So you were always there during my time in need. I'd lost all of my hope, no one to comfort me. But it was always you who gave the ability to strengthen me inside and keep me on my feet. So why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh, why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh, why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh, why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah. It was always you who kept me so strong. It was always you who restrained me from wrong. It was always you helped when I was sick. And it's only you who we should all worship. So Allah, we ask you, so why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh, why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh, why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh, why me? Oh Allah, oh Allah, oh, oh.